Clubhouse.
Jill, ask them what they think about supervillain.
That sounds better to me. More exciting.
Do you prefer saving America? How about saving the world?
Nope. It's saving America.
Welcome back to Pod Clubhouse's continuing coverage of The Boys, Season 4, Episode 5. Beware the Jabberwock, my son. Do you know what a Jabberwock is?
Yes. Star Wars?
No, it's not.
No?
No.
What is that?
It is a quote from a stanza from Lewis Carroll. It goes, I copied it over. It's, beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub bird and shun, the frumious bandersnatch. I don't know what that all means, but it's basically a father describing monsters to his son and to look out for them.
Oh, but isn't Jabberwocky from Star Wars? So basically George Lucas took that from...
Well, he probably borrowed some of that idea.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jabberwocky is the same as this. It's because the whole work is something about the Jabberwocky. I don't know. Lewis Carroll is the Alice in Wonderland.
The boys going
guy.
deep. Yeah.
In this one, there are monsters afoot, but this time it is the father, isn't it? Lots of crazy shit in this one. It's been a season of crazy shit. Let's see, I detected maybe actually like 5 different stories or characters worth focusing on. So they're kind of expanding what to keep track of in a given episode as the season wears on. Here's a simple one to start us off with. In the beginning of the episode, we saw that Starlight House is a wreck and it's been vandalized. Is that enough to tell us that Starlight House and the Starlighter movement are basically dead in the water? They don't exist anymore?
I guess it's sort of like she's gotten canceled, right?
It seemed that
in some
way,
ways.
yeah.
Yeah. She's kind of gone rogue in, like, I guess. And so we know stuff is going around, like, happening out there in the real world. And this season seems like it's kind of, we've seen a little bit more of that. But we're not really, we see like the after effects of it. Like, we know people are out there outraged and stuff, but we don't really see them. And so this is like one of the cases, because it's always focusing on the main characters and they just talk about what's going on out there. And so this is like one of those cases where we know people are against Starlight and the masses and firecrackers getting them all riled up. But yeah, it's just kind of hard to gauge, I guess, because we only see it from the inside looking out.
Whenever we see the masses, it is out of the corner of our eye. You know, it's like on the news or rallies or Vought events, or like TruthCon was sort of that way a little bit. But otherwise, you're right. It does focus so heavily on the main characters that it can be hard to get a sense of what's happening in the world at large unless we really pay attention to those tidbits. But this was hard to miss, the graffiti and whatnot. All right. So at the end of the episode, Frenchie has had enough with his guilty conscience. So he's turned himself in. Is there more to it than just what he said at the farm? Like, he doesn't believe he's forgivable. Even in the eyes of God, he's no longer redeemable. Is that why he turned himself in? And do you think it'll last, or do you think they'll need to go and get Frenchie and get him out of there?
Kimiko and Frenchie have had sort of this parallel journey, I think, this season. They're both facing their pasts. They're both not talking about it. And they're both saying, oh, I'm fine. And they're the closest ones, and they don't confide in each other. Kimiko faced her past with, basically, it was kind of alluded to that she brought that girl in and then kind of put her on the other girl that was against her.
Yeah. Like, Kimiko had been the abductor in that scenario.
Yes. Which is sort of like, I guess, it's a commentary of like, that's usually what happens when like people capture you and then like they make the person go and get other people. So she was like one of those people. So it's like very unfortunate. And so she had to face her past, and then, you know, they kind of like let it go. But the girl was like, kind of told her like, you know, you did this to me. And she literally had scars on her face. And then Kimiko left. Frenchie faced his past with the boyfriend finally finding out and wanting to kill him, but didn't. It sort of like put me out of my misery, and he didn't. So he couldn't take it anymore. And he went down another path that Kimiko didn't. She's not willing to turn herself in, but he did. And so I guess it's just sort of like his way of atoning. I don't know, it's the boys. They can't keep Frenchie in prison like that. So I do think they have to go get him.
If his belief is that he's unforgivable in the eyes of God, then what does trying to settle his debts with the laws of man do? In like kind of the hierarchy of how a pious man like Frenchie's belief system would work. Is it just the best he can get? Just kind of the punishment he would receive from the court of law? Is that the salve, the atoning that you mentioned?
I feel like maybe Frenchie, the actor, maybe just had something else to do. It's one of those things that they like kind of sideline characters.
Prison's a great way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But Kimiko, I don't know. I feel like with their story, it's kind of like I liked where it was going with them getting closer together in these seasons. But season 3 just feels like they're putting this unnecessary thing between them just for some drama. Like they're not, like Kimiko is really like, go be with the boyfriend. I really don't like you that way. And then Frenchie's like pushing her away when they've like been through so much. Maybe that's a natural progression of like the past that they've had, but it feels a little forced.
I thought so too. Just, I'm going to turn myself in. He's been living with himself this whole time. And the Colin thing, yeah, that's a more serious type situation, coming face to face with the person representing that dark chapter in your history. But still, he's been doing this bad shit for a long time. And now suddenly he's sensitive to it. Like, or maybe it's just caught up with him and it's just the weight is something he can't bear anymore.
Which is fair, but I think the way they've done it doesn't make sense. It's just feeling off a little bit, especially when he's been so like, on drugs and things. Like you would come down from that eventually, be like, oh, have to face all the demons that all the things that you've done.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of like a soldier coming back and having PTSD and like just going back into normal life. But like he doesn't live a normal life. He's always high tension, all this. So it's like, it's interesting that he's finally having this moment when he still is like, they're going on missions and doing things. Like it's not really downtime to have that like kind of pivotal moment. But I mean, who am I to say when all that stuff comes up? But it just feels like their storyline just feels forced.
At this point, yeah, I agree.
It does. Yeah. It just feels a little off.
All right. Let's shift over to another boy, Billy Butcher. He's on the mission to the farm with everybody. But he's, to me, starting to feel more and more desperate as indicated by dealing with Kessler again.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't we, this podcasting team, one of us, predict that he would start double dealing between the boys and Kessler to try to get what he wants, try to get Ryan to safety?
Yep, we did. And I mean, it made sense for Butcher, because why would they bring in a character like Joe Kessler and not use him?
Maybe they didn't show it so much in this episode, but I think with every unit of time that passes, it's fair to assume he's feeling worse.
Yes.
Just that omnipresent sense of my stopwatch is running to the end here. So I got to keep working at this, got to keep doing things. But he seems to be getting more drastic, like cutting off Samir's leg at the end. Butcher's always been pretty severe, but he's usually saved the worst shit for Soups.
Just when you think that Butcher was kind of coming around and, Mother's Milk was like, was really sweet when he was like, you're a motherfucker, but a motherfucker with a heart, which should have been our tale. Because It was just like, and then we find out that, he cut off somebody's leg with the help of Joe Kessler. And we're like, what? I was like, oh, that's Billy Butcher. There is still that version of him inside to get what he wants, which is to save Ryan for Becca, because he's been seeing her, and really like that's his mission, is like stop at nothing to get to to make sure that Ryan is safe before he dies. So yeah, I was surprised that he did that, but I also like that the show kind of went there, because I think it was getting a little like, oh, Billy's just, not that he's been soft at all by any means in this season. No. But it did feel a little like the original Boys, of just what he's capable of. Because we get a little too like, he's so nice or blah, blah, or in his own way. And this reminded me like, oh no, he is crazy and willing to do anything.
Speaking of Samir, I know he probably couldn't know this, but Samir isn't or wasn't the big brain of the virus project. There's a flashback that was showed at the beginning of the episode with Newman meeting another man in a parking garage, and she asks him, "You're the only one that knows how to make this," or whatever. And then she pops his head. That was a scene from Gen V, and he was the project lead on the virus. So now that he has Samir, I mean, now what? I don't think Samir can do what he's asking.
Yeah, I mean, he's not really fighting to do it, like to really make a case. It's not, it seems like Samir's just is okay not doing it. I mean, would you really trust someone who just cut off your leg? Like, it's sort of one of those things like, oh, tell me everything and I'll save you. And it's like, I hope I never in that position, but I'd be like, I think you're just going to kill me anyway. So let's just get it over with.
He's desperate. He's just desperate.
But I am thinking if Victoria finds out what Billy has done, he will definitely get hit popped ASAP.
Yeah, I think you're right about Billy and his intentions with Samir. One way or the other, I don't think Samir is hobbling his way away from this, however it comes down. Whether he helps or he doesn't help, I don't think Samir's going to make it.
No. Like, what would be the end would be like him. I think Billy was like, "Oh yeah, you can head off once you're done making this thing." And it's like, what is he gonna do? And what would he tell Victoria and Zoe? Like, "Oh, I just got my leg chopped off. Okay, no big deal."
It's crazy shit that happened.
Yeah, because like it wouldn't make sense either if like the sheep, like ate that, because then he would have that virus and he would be sick and contaminated. So like that doesn't make any sense if he kind of survived that attack.
Speaking of Butcher and that sort of where's he at in his emotional spectrum, there was that rabbit on Temp V that he freed and then later had to kill. I saw a couple weird parallels with that. Like in this same episode, Hughie has to decide to assist his father with ending his life. Also in the previous episode, there was Homelander who had lasered out Marty's balls and then smushed his head to put him out of his misery. Very much like how Butcher puts the rabbit out of its misery when it's kind of dying with that weird expulsion of worm things, I think we're starting to see more and more parallels with Butcher and Homelander. But did you pick up on any of the parallels to what Hughie was doing just in that rabbit bit, or did you get another read on the rabbit situation?
Well, I was just thinking that it wasn't because of the misery, like putting the rabbit out of the misery. It was more like killing the tentacle thing for Billy.
Well, the tentacle thing wasn't great.
Yeah, no. And I read it as he still doesn't know what happened to him, like how he was able to kill Ezekiel. And he kind of just woke up and like was blacked out from whatever happened in that trailer. And I read it as he saw the rabbit there with the tentacles coming out and was like, is that what I did? Like, I don't know, maybe I'm just reading that as an audience member, but like two and two are not, I don't know, just the way he was like kind of like eyeing it in a weird way of like, oh, did I do that? Like, that kind of thing. Because of the temp V and all that stuff, where I feel like he had a realization in that moment of like, I'm really effed. Like, I think like he might think that's what happened, like the tentacle thing is happening to him maybe.
No, I like that read because he released the rabbit because he saw himself in the rabbit. Then he had to kill the rabbit because you're saying he saw himself in the rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's a lot. I like that though.
Yeah, and I do feel like with Hughie, that whole storyline too, I do feel like that one was a little bit maybe, I don't know, to have Simon Pegg go out in that way, like, which I think it was a good way to go out, but it also felt a little forced. But I think as far as Hughie's storyline, the whole thing about the dad saying like, oh, you wouldn't be the one to help me with this, you would want to keep me going. And for then Hughie to have to do it and be kind of a big kid,
Yeah.
it really made him kind of grow up in that way. But also he's been through so much where like, his mom's like, why are you so calm in this? He's like, oh yeah, I've been here before. And so I think if this had been Hughie season 1, he definitely would have probably kept his dad alive and probably just like maybe chained him up or something, just so, like sort of like keeping him sort of like a zombie.
Shaun of the Dead style.
Yeah. Sort of that thing. And it was actually kind of sweet to see him sort of like, oh, this is what he meant. Like, I am usually that person, but I have to do something good for my father now. like his last wishes and fulfilling that, which he did choose to not give him the V. It's just that his mom thought he did want to give him the V. So he had already made that choice
To let him
before.
go, right?
So it was just to let him go. So I think it was just sort of like, oh, just got to re-let him go for real this time.
So you brought up Hughie, and now that the situation with the dad is over, what all do you think we learn or got out of it as like an end product? And I mean, now we have mom, Daphne, but
Yeah.
what else? I guess you mentioned the progress Hughie's made with big boy decisions. That's a major step for him, because I feel like the Jar Jar test will come around again. Remember, Jar Jar's the cat that he wouldn't put down.
Maybe it's Butcher. It always comes down to him and Butcher.
I think so, yeah.
It was like, yeah, so I think maybe those parallels are, will Butcher ask Hughie to put him out of his misery? And will Hughie do it down the road?
That's a good call, because I could see that coming with what we know about the story so far, Butcher's condition, kind of these parallels and callbacks that are happening this season with characters and the stuff that they're going through, progress that they're making. Billy makes the most sense because he's already dying. And and you're right about, it's like Hughie became the heart for Billy when he decided he didn't need one anymore. So that's why, you know, a lot, I think, how absent of Hughie, Billy's able to do all these things that he's doing secretly, but away from the guy that would say, hey, you're going too far, you knock it off.
They haven't really interacted this season. So I do feel like down the road, they have to sync up again because like they are just too close of, I mean, the boys has built that relationship up where I think they have to connect again in a big moment.
That would be a pretty big moment. And this is halfway point of the season. So there's only 3 to go after this, 6, 7, and 8. That's all we get for the next, 5, 6, 7 years, however long it takes to make these seasons of the boys.
Yeah.
I think that was all that I had for boys characters. So I was kind of amused with the V-52 convention. I get the D23 emails, every week about what's going on with Disney IPs and things like that. I've never been though, so all I can imagine is that it's kind of like a Disney focused Comic-Con, where every presentation is about upcoming Disney, or in this case, Vought stuff, which is what it was. However, we see at the beginning that Homelander is so focused on what he's doing, he can't even really hear the things that are happening around him so much. Is it me, or is he actually scarier now that he seems more focused?
Yeah, because I mean, he went home in the last episode.
That's right.
But he said he got some, maybe he found what he needed, but I feel like it just made it worse because he didn't really find anything. He just killed a bunch of people that hurt him. And a lot of people that didn't. It was like just those two, like the 3. And it's funny though, because he didn't put the director out of her misery. He made her watch. So Homelander is like the opposite in that way.
I kind of wonder if she was left to tell the tale, to tell anyone else that ever thinks of doing anything like this again, what happened here.
But she was the one that was like, it doesn't matter what happens. Like, you're still searching for love and support.
Yeah, and we programmed that into you.
Yeah, and I just feel like it wouldn't have been what he wanted to get out of it. And so, yeah, he is a little bit just like, now that he knows, like, oh, there's no redemption for me. Like, I went back. Those people, like, really effed me up. The thing I'm searching for does not exist, really, because he can't get it. It's so programmed in him of wanting that support that the people... This whole thing that he's trying to do, especially with Ryan, is to get that love and support. So yeah, I think he is scarier, but I think it was the way he was like talking to Ryan too. It was interesting that like by setting him free, as he calls it, that Ryan actually kind of like, oh, okay, like maybe you're not, like he warmed up to Homelander.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about. Like there was that moment with the director who had been flirting or being aggressive with his PA, and Homelander calls them over and lets Ryan adjudicate what happens next. And Ryan seemed to love that.
He did, yeah. Well, it's funny because he was like, "Oh, don't laugh at me," because he was like, "What do you want to do?" And he was probably thinking that Homelander was going to see that as a weakness, like, "Oh, I want to help people." But he was fine with it, and he was like, "Oh, okay, like cool. Like you're not going to make me go and kill people, I guess in a different way." And by having Ryan do it his own way and think he's helping, the PA by letting her kind of do what she wanted to do, the director. It was so twisted, but his message was like, "Oh, my dad let me kind of do this my own way and didn't force me to do this." So it kind of let him, like the freedom of that let him like it in a way, which was also very scary.
I kind of wonder if like the director or maybe the writer or somebody involved with production at a creative level had or seen something that made them just so pissed off, because like and I'm sure that happens. Obviously, there are stories, loud and clear stories. So, but the way that the PA didn't stop hitting, just kept hitting, and the sound effect that they used was sort of that Rocky hitting Mr. T kind of
Yeah,
sound
yeah.
effect. A pretty good wallop is what she was delivering time and time again. After she'd been prompted to keep going, she just kept going. So it felt like a little on-screen catharsis for the trodden upon, and especially in the filmmaking business. That's a little how I read it anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's like most of the time people don't get to fight back in that way because you're so scared of getting fired or getting taken down. So I guess it was a way, and like a commentary on like if given the opportunity by the most powerful people, which is Ryan and Homelander, to do it, she did it, because it just the frustration of that, like being so powerless and then being able to take your power back. I feel like that's what I read from that, which was in a weird, twisted way. Okay.
Well, in the boys' world, might and
In the
right,
boys' world, yeah.
they run together, right or wrong. That is the message of the soups anyway, that they tell themselves. Might makes right. Ryan saw a little bit of that throughout, like dad lasering the guy who threw the bottle last season and getting off. And then he got kind of a distaste for it with the fake save. But then he saw this, and I think he felt like that was actual justice. Yeah.
Which doesn't bode well for humanity.
Yeah. So Homelander's been trying to turn Ryan to believe him, to be more his son. And he's been using junk food and video games and looks like no school or all the other things that kids might want. And none of that shit's really worked. Is this kind of thing what will do it, do you think?
Yeah, no, it seemed like that was exactly what was that. It was just not forcing Ryan to do anything, because obviously that's something that I think anybody in any position is like, when you have to force someone to do something, obviously that person, you just don't want to do it, even if it's the right thing or if it's better for you, like a parent telling a kid what to do or things like that. And he gave him the freedom to choose, hey, if you don't want to do that show, it's okay. And it was almost reverse psychology in a way, but like Homelander didn't realize he was doing that. I mean, he says he did, like, "Oh, people forced me to do all this stuff, so I don't want you to do it." And it's weird that approach got Ryan to kind of do what he wanted him to do,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of like respect and love him a little bit, Like, I don't think Ryan's fully there. I think he's still hesitant, but I do think he was like maybe found a glimpse of a path where he could live with Homelander if it's going to be in this capacity where he has the choice to feel like you have freedom. But of course, Homelander's not going to let him have complete freedom if he doesn't do what he wants in a way. So it's sort of like maybe it's like fake freedom that Ryan doesn't fully understand right now. Because if Homelander just turns, which he does, his moods turn so quickly.
Right.
And Ryan does something like, what if Ryan wants to go see Billy? Will Homelander be okay with that?
Negative. No.
Yeah.
No, he'd feel rejected, just like he did already, but he might be even more so because he feels like he's actually connecting now. So that would feel like a big step backward. And wonder why now? Why more of that? Where you seem to be doing so well.
Yeah, so it's a slippery slope with Ryan. Like, I think it's maybe like a false illusion right now of them getting together, because I just feel like he turns so quickly when he's triggered.
So at the very end there, Homelander gathers everybody up and says that he's going to declare war What do you suppose he's talking about? Is this what they're talking about with Newman, but in a more active sense, or soups against humans, or what do you think's happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I think Homelander definitely wants to. I mean, it's crazy to think, but maybe he wants to be president. Maybe that's his ultimate goal. We were just talking about what he ultimately wants, which is like the love and adoration of the people.
Right.
So, whatever it means, whether it's him declaring, oh, the soups are going to save America from, they're obviously doing this like smear campaign against the Starlighters. And so they're kind of going at it that way. And him and Sage have been kind of working up at this plan that we don't really know exactly what she's up to. She's just kind of pulling strings that we think is in Homelander's favor. But I think it's going to be on a global scale because it has to be. It's going to be, I mean, if he's building this patriotism, don't you think it would apply to the whole world?
Well, I know he is America first. He has the cape
Yes.
of the American flag and all that. But you're right. What good is it to just have the United States? Ultimately, that might satisfy him for a short time. But you're right. I think the world would end up being his ultimate goal.
Yeah, I think if he can get the US, like everyone on his side in the US, that would kind of give him the surge of, kind of endorphins that he wants of like, oh, he has the people. But we know that, that can change quickly. So people get bored, and, whatever. So to keep that up would be really hard. And how would he keep that up is probably by starting a war with other nations, or kind of trying to go and be like, America, yeah. So people, not necessarily for whatever reason that is, but just to keep his fans in America on his side and keep that love and adoration going, that's like his ultimate goal. So I feel like he can get it for a while here, but then to sustain that would have to be more global.
Sort of like how certain world leaders decide to go to war for no reason, but then convince the populace that it was the most important thing that they do.
Yeah.
And that meanwhile, their internal approval ratings are high because they feel like they're winning this very necessary war that the outside world knows is complete garbage, but internally you're being told it's all good. And so you're thinking maybe something like that, but here.
Yeah, I think so.
That's totally conceivable. And especially how like they've shown public opinion and such as with like the Starlight House. It's pretty interesting that she lost like 100% of her supporters at this point that we know of anyway. As a parallel, I guess maybe they're just showing that the people of this world are that fickle. They're that tuned in to listening to the media, having their opinions decided by somebody else, that what you're describing would definitely work in the boys' world.
Yeah, and we haven't really seen, unless I'm wrong, have we seen outside footage or from those like snippets that we do get from like the television coverage, anything outside like globally? We haven't really, right? It's just kind of focused on the US.
It is. I mean, where'd they get Soldier Boy from? Wasn't it Russia they had to steal?
It was something, yeah, it was.
So it's occasional that we go outside, but it's really US focused.
It feels like this season is kind of leading, especially with Newman in the vice president, kind of doing like being a vice president ish, right? They haven't won yet, right?
They are
confused.
president and vice president elect.
Oh, no, okay.
So they are
Yes,
elected,
okay.
but they are not.
They haven't sworn in.
Yes, right.
Yeah. So I feel like if that's the end goal, what would be the next goal, So I feel like this is all about making sure maybe that Newman, they obviously want to get rid of the president-elect. So will she step in as president? And then what would be the goal from there?
I mean, she's poised to take that seat, but then what? Do you actually control her?
Yeah.
Maybe because she has a secret that she doesn't want out. But if she's in the big chair, then that wields a lot of power. Again, we've talked about it, but the complaints about quote unquote the writing this season, as we go through this sort of analysis and the possibilities that do exist just with what they've laid out here, that makes sense without diving too deep into any of the political parallels or anything like that. I don't know. It all hangs together pretty well in a satisfying way for me still.
I do feel like the episodes, I think like the first three were a little, like they were okay. They were kind of setting it up. And then I feel like 4 or 5 have really kind of like, it felt like The Boys more, even though it is very much parallel of like current headlines, but it just felt a little bit more like I was like, oh yeah, this is why I love the show kind of thing. Even with some of like the Kimiko and Frenchie storylines that feel forced and the Huey dad one, I mean, even though it was like, I can see why maybe they did it for Huey's character growth. I didn't like it as much, but I think overall I still do like where it's going with all the other, especially the tension building with A Train and him being the double agent is something I want to see. Like I really want to know what happens to A Train this season, like sort of being the one that's ratting it out, but so close to getting found out, but then not. And I do feel that Sage knows that it's him
Oh
with
yeah.
the kind of the looks that she was giving him, even when like Ashley kind of threw that guy under the bus and they killed him. But she looked at A Train in that meeting, Sage did, and was like, "Oh, kind of like you escaped this time, you know."
Mm-hmm. I think we described in our last chat that having such a smart character is tricky as a viewer, especially those of us that analyze the show, because we don't know the extent of what she knows and what she's told us, you know, and because it can go as far as she can be as smart as the writers, basically, because they are the definers of this world. Most characters don't have that advantage, but she could.
And it's really interesting that she takes turning off your brain to another level
Yes.
with the like, you know, like that's her weakness in a way of like she can just kind of be dumb as, you know, she kind of wants to just be put out of her misery of being so smart. Talk about that misery storyline again. It's almost like she wants someone to step on her just to kind of turn off her brain, you know?
Yeah. It's underappreciated, I guess, the weight of being the smartest person in the world. I'll never know.
Yeah. Speak for yourself, Paul.
Exactly. I didn't mean to impugn. That's why I corrected myself. All right. So finishing up with Newman. So last season, there was a betrayal that sent Stan Edgar to prison. But here at the end of this episode, after this situation with rabid flying sheep and all kinds of crazy animals, she springs him from the marshal, taking him back to prison. So why do you suppose she rescued him now?
I think it's like that love, you know, that weird love. Just like in the series, everyone has this like twisted version of like someone that's there for them or not there for them or force them or, you know, and I think Stan is her version. And no matter how hard she wants to hate him, or obviously she did betray him, she still has that. And maybe deep down, she also, now that he knows about Zoe too, I feel like she wouldn't have saved him, but maybe because she doesn't have Homelander or a cure yet, maybe she thinks that he can go find one. I don't know. And then she thought Samir was dead. Maybe she was like, well, F it. Like, what do I have to lose if I let him go? And maybe I can have him down the road as an ally or to help her, you know, if something goes bad. Because he does care about her and Zoe.
It was interesting to see them have work together, you know, Newman and Edgar in this episode. And it's always great to see Giancarlo Esposito do his thing. If you ever see him at a con, he's actually a pretty lighthearted, goofy guy. He's not Gus Fring and he's not Stan Edgar. He's always cracking a joke, actually, on the stage when they have him with like the Mandalorian actors or whatever. So that's always funny to see that he's not these guys.
Yeah.
But throughout the episode, they're exchanging little barbs and tit for tat back and forth. But she pops that head and she looks at him with sort of like, I'm sorry eyes.
Yeah.
That's what I saw. I don't know where he's at. I don't know where she stashed him, but I think that's it. Like, he's out, so he's a fugitive. So it's not like he's actually like a threat to her per se. And so maybe that's why he can be out of prison, because it doesn't matter at this point.
Yeah, and if anything, he would be relying on her if she knows where he is. So it's not like that's like a power play as well.
Yeah, which is not a dynamic that their relationship has really had before. And Stan, Edgar's not usually the one being controlled.
Yeah, maybe it's also her safety net because, I mean, she's playing without Homelander in this weird situation out of reluctance, but I mean, maybe that will be sort of her get out of Homelander jail free card or something. Maybe he's going to help her do that or not, but he's going to come back in this season because they didn't let him out for nothing, for no reason.
Good call. Yeah. Now, this last question is, I couldn't figure it out. But maybe you can tell me, since it was two women involved. When they're on the farm and they're looking for whatever they're looking for, and they're, I guess, Samir, and it's before the flying sheep attack, Newman starts kind of digging at Starlight and riles her up to the point where Starlight hits her, knocks her on the ground. Why do you suppose she wanted to wind her up like that?
Well, I do think as far as the female dynamic, I think just from my own experience, I think you can really push those buttons that other people can't. And so I think it was one of those things where Victoria was able to kind of really hit Starlight where, like, I think the stuff that she's going through, Annie, it just like, she was like, oh, fuck you, like, like, I don't know, it was just like the right moment. And sometimes people will do that, especially between women. So, I mean, just anybody in general that knows you well. And I think she's like, I know how this goes and blah, blah, and like calling her out on her bullshit. Because I think even if Victoria doesn't kind of agree with Starlight, I think she doesn't like seeing someone like her not be on the fence and stuff. And she was just like, or she was also just sort of like, you got to be put together. Because that was her main thing, is like, you're losing your shit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know how that goes. I want to pop everybody's head off. But like, it was actually a really nice moment of like kind of being honest with her and kind of giving her like a little pep talk, but Annie just didn't want to hear it.
Annie is also having a couple hitches with her powers. They don't seem to be on tap like they should be. I know we don't have any real sense of why that would be, but did you notice that? Like, she tried to get it to pop and it wouldn't. I was thinking maybe she's better when she's closer to a major power source, how she kind of draws power locally. And the more that's there, the more she can draw. So if she's in the middle of a farm, maybe there's not much for her to draw. But I don't know. I'm making that up. She could be solar powered for all I know.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily tied to that. I think it's like alluded to that she's like past that, like she just has power. But I think it's something else. I think because of what happened with Firecracker and basically Starlighters going against her now, I think it's mental. It makes us wonder, like, a lot of the powers can be tied to that. Like, it's not just like you automatically have them. Seems, at least for Starlight's case, she's going through a lot emotionally, and that seems to be affecting her powers.
I'm ready to buy that, because that happens in all different kinds of comic book mythologies. Just you lose your confidence for a couple episodes and then your powers don't work like they should, or something like that. You need to be fully focused in order to be able to use them. That's a pretty common kind of trope.
And she still has, and we saw at the beginning of the episode, like, she's still working on her powers. It's believable to think like, oh, if she is emotionally not stable, or she's going through all these different feelings and not feeling it, not in a good place, not confident, that's kind of out the window.
Well, I agree. And that was all of the questions I had for episode 5. Did you have anything else you wanted to discuss on episode 5?
No, I think that's it. We kind of covered a lot.
Yeah, I think we probably did. I mean, we glossed over some stuff, like obviously Hughie Sr.'s dead now. That's a pretty big deal because if I understand things correctly, the Hughie from the comic book was designed to look like Simon Pegg. And that's why Simon Pegg is involved with the show, but he was just older than they needed Hughie to be. So they made him Hughie's dad. But he did have like a tie, even if it was sort of incidental to the show. All of his points of reference I found very charming because I'm also that same kind of nerd that when I think of a famous place and then if I can associate it with a movie, then I'm that much more excited to go and see those movie locations. I don't know that I would do that in Paris per se.
You don't want to do the Da Vinci book or what was it?
I'm not opposed to it, I suppose, but I would need to try to sneak it into the agenda. I wouldn't be like, let's go to Paris and do this. It would be more like, while we're in Paris, if we have some unallotted time, then maybe we can go do the Da Vinci Code tour. But yeah, I do the same thing.
I guess one question I do like to close it is, do you think that his death was not earned, but what's the right word? Like, was it a satisfying death? I feel like it kind of felt like they just needed to get rid of him.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like I like the way that he died in a way because it was really tragic, but I also feel like, I don't know, it just didn't feel as impactful as I thought it would.
Well, we have only gotten a few appearances of Hughie Sr. throughout the whole show.
Yeah, that's why I think it didn't feel like it was like, oh, they just got to tie this storyline out and get rid of him.
Mm-hmm. When I think of similar kinds of things, like, did you ever watch Arrow on CW?
I saw a few, but not enough.
At the beginning of the series, Oliver Queen comes back from being shipwrecked and lives with his family because they're wealthy, but his family brings a lot of challenges and stuff. But his mom and his sister and stepdad all live in this mansion, right? And mom is a big character for like several seasons, but then there's like this big death scene for her with a major villain that you weren't sure how far this villain was going to go. And then he kills his mom, who's been there for like 3 or 4 seasons. Now, all of a sudden, the stakes on this goofy CW show are huge. And I mentioned that parallel only as a comic book character losing a parent in the course of superheroics to say, like, I agree with you that it felt like they just needed to let Simon Pegg move on rather than give him a huge exit.
Yeah, I think that's why it was unsatisfying, because I feel like since we're TV pros in some ways, we just felt like, oh, they're just letting him go for that. So it was kind of like, It wasn't necessarily really bad, but it did feel like he deserved more. That character deserved more. But there's also so much going on that I'm like, I also am kind of glad that they kind of got rid of that storyline so Hughie can move on and not be dragged on by that.
Right. So we were wondering, why did they bring mom back? Well, maybe it's because they needed to let Simon Pegg move on for one reason or another, but they still needed that parental anchor in the real world for Hughie. Mm-hmm. So this is how they needed to do it. Rather than give Hughie Sr. some sort of like retirement community in Boca Raton, that wouldn't keep a parent in New York to keep that level of stakes, for Hughie high. But yeah, it does feel like Simon just said, I need to go do other things and I can't keep coming back here for this.
Yeah, we might be wrong, but it felt that way. So I think that's where I'm like, oh, something was amiss, but it's okay. It was fine. It's just one of those things where you're like,
They made it fun, with the phasing
they did.
And the mischief he got up to. Kind of madcap in a boys sort of way. Very gory, graphic, of course. But character-wise, I think what we're saying is, fun or not, it would have been cool just to let one person have some kind of happy ending or something.
Yes.
All right. Well, that has been our coverage for the 5th episode of the 4th season of The Boys. If you like this podcast, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to it on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, or wherever you found this podcast. If you have a comment for Kat or I, please go to podclubhouse.com and leave a comment on, anywhere. You can leave a comment anywhere, and we'll get it and figure out an answer for you as soon as we can. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for listening. This has been an original Pod Clubhouse production. Pod Clubhouse is a podcast network dedicated to encouraging collaboration among podcasters and friends to bring a fresh voice and diverse perspective on a wide array of content. Please visit and leave a comment for us at podclubhouse.com. Rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast feeds on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Pod Clubhouse. Our DMs are always open, and we'd love to hear from you.
Pod Clubhouse.